Today we're taking a trip back to the 70s, to a sci-fi show that some of you might remember, Ark II.
Ah, Arc 2. Yeah, it's a fascinating one. Even if you haven't seen it, stick with us because we're going to be looking at some really interesting excerpts about it. What's so interesting about Arc 2 is how it really captures this specific moment in time, both in pop culture and in how we felt about the future.
Okay, so, set the scene for us. What was going on in the world when this show first premiered?
Well, imagine a world that's just dealing with the after effects of the Vietnam War. There was this kind of disillusionment and
Mhm.
anxieties about the environment were starting to really grow. Think about things like the oil crisis.
Mm.
People were really starting to worry about the planet's future. And Arc 2 really reflected that fear. It kind of envisioned a future where those anxieties had become like a scary reality.
So it wasn't just your typical spaceships and lasers, huh? This show was actually tapping into, real-world stuff.
Exactly. It wasn't afraid to show a bleak future where pollution and war had ravaged the earth.
Wow.
But, there was this glimmer of hope.
Okay.
It showed a team of scientists in this high-tech mobile lab, the Ark II, traveling through this wasteland, trying to rebuild, to spread knowledge.
Oh, that's where that iconic opening narration comes in, right?
Yeah.
The one that always gave me chills.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It really set the tone. One version goes like this. For millions of years, Earth was fertile and rich. Then pollution and waste began to take their toll. Civilization fell into ruin. This is the world of the 25th century. Only a handful of scientists remain, men who have vowed to rebuild what has been destroyed. This is their achievement. Ark II, a mobile storehouse of scientific knowledge, manned by a highly trained crew of young people, their mission, to bring the hope of a new future to mankind.
Wow. They really, didn't sugarcoat anything, did they?
No, not at all. And this context is really important to, understand the show's impact. Arc 2, it wasn't just a kid's show. It was, a reflection of the anxieties and hopes of a whole generation.
Right.
Think Planet of the Apes or Silent Running, those kinds of movies. Also from that era, where they
Yeah.
show these dystopian futures, and those ideas were really resonating with people.
It's interesting. You have these kids watching a show about a devastated Earth, facing all these heavy dilemmas, but there's also this message of rebuilding, of knowledge being the key.
Yeah, and the Arc 2 crew, with their mobile lab all full of technology and knowledge, they became symbols of that hope.
Makes sense. It wasn't just about surviving. They were actively trying to, make things better, right?
Right. And, it wasn't just about showing this bleak future. It was about, solutions,
Yeah.
about the power of knowledge and community.
Speaking of the crew, we can't forget Adam, the talking chimpanzee.
Ah, yes, Adam, played by a real chimpanzee Moochie. This was way before CGI. So training a chimp for a sci-fi show. Well, I'm sure it had its moments.
Yeah, I bet. Can't even imagine what that must have been like. But moving on to, I think, the real star of the show, the Ark II vehicle itself.
Oh, it was really something 44 feet long,
Yeah.
6 wheels, custom-built fiberglass body on a Ford chassis.
Wow.
It was designed by this group, the Brubaker Group, who were known for their futuristic car designs. They even made a smaller vehicle for the show,
Oh, cool.
the Ark Roamer.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's actually pretty impressive, how much detail went into creating this whole futuristic world,
Yeah.
even with the limitations back then.
And get this, they were way ahead of their time when it came to recycling.
What do you mean?
Parts of the Ark II set were later used in other shows,
Mm.
like Space Academy and Jason Star Command.
Oh, wow, that's pretty cool.
Talk about being resourceful.
Yeah, definitely. It shows you, how ingenious the production team was. But I think more importantly, that contrast you see, this high-tech vehicle against a backdrop of a ruined world. It really adds to the visual impact. It's like saying, look at what we could do, and then look what we could lose.
That's a good point. It really makes you think, what would we do in a situation like that? Would we even try to rebuild?
It's that power of good science fiction, isn't it?
Yeah.
It kind of holds up a mirror, and makes us think about the choices we make.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And Ark II did that in a way that kids could, grasp.
Mm-hmm.
One article I read actually said that it was like treading that fine line between adult and kids show.
Mm.
What do you think? Where do you draw that line, What
Mhm.
makes something appeal to both?
It's a tough balance, but Arc 2, it managed to pull it off, This engaging premise, a cool vehicle, young heroes, but also exploring these complex themes. It's
Mhm.
pretty impressive.
Yeah, it is. And speaking of those themes, The show wasn't just about, like, wandering through a wasteland, right?
Yeah.
They would encounter all these different, like, little societies,
Yeah.
each with their own problems.
That's right. And that's where I think it really gets interesting. It wasn't just about surviving in a post-apocalyptic world. It was about like rebuilding society.
Mm.
And that meant dealing with, all these complex social issues.
The excerpts, they mentioned some wild ones. They meet, like, feral children,
Yeah.
a power-hungry baron who's hoarding resources, and even people who are frozen, like cryogenically frozen from the 20th century.
It's wild, right? It's
Yeah.
almost like each episode was this mini morality play, using science fiction as a lens to look at real-world issues.
Like a warning wrapped in, like, this sci-fi adventure, huh?
Yeah, maybe. But it was also a way to engage, young viewers in these really important conversations about like ethics, responsibility, the kind of future they wanted to create.
Which is what makes it even more surprising that Ark II only ran for one season, just 15 episodes.
I know, right? You think a show with like such a cool premise, that visual style, it would have lasted longer.
So what happened? Why was it canceled?
Well, remember, this was the 70s. Network television worked so differently back then. One season of a kid's show, they could stretch that out for years with reruns.
Oh, so they just kept showing those same 15 episodes over and over?
Pretty much. The networks figured, kids wouldn't mind watching repeats. And it was a cheaper way to fill up that Saturday morning programming.
Huh. So even though it was, like, short-lived in terms of new content, it still stuck around.
Yeah.
And, it must have left a real impact on those who saw it, that vehicle, the themes. It's such a cool snapshot of 70s pop culture and those anxieties about the future. It's kind of wild to imagine kids back then watching this show about a world, totally wrecked by pollution and war. Do you think that actually had a lasting impact on them?
Well, it's hard to say for sure, but I think it's safe to assume that it definitely sparked some important conversations. Remember, this was a time when like environmental awareness was truly on the rise.
So Ark II wasn't just reflecting those anxieties, it was also like adding fuel to the fire in a way,
Yeah.
making people really confront these issues head on.
Absolutely. It brought those fears to life. But it also went beyond just, the environment. It looked at themes of social responsibility, ethical decision-making, the importance of community. The Ark II crew, they weren't just scientists, right? They were problem solvers, mediators, peacemakers.
It is interesting how the show balanced all these like heavy, serious themes with a sense of adventure, and optimism.
Yeah.
It wasn't just all doom and gloom. It always had this underlying message of hope that things could get better. Remember those guest stars they had on the show? Jonathan Harris from Lost in Space, Malachi Throne from Star Trek, even Robbie the Robot showed up.
You're right. I forgot about that. It's funny because it was a kids' show, but they were able to attract some pretty big names.
So as we wrap up our deep dives today, listener, we want to leave you with this thought. If Ark II were to be rebooted today, what would it look like? What would it tell us about our hopes and fears, for the future?
What challenges would this new crew have to face? What would their arc look like? What lessons would they teach us?
Thanks for joining us on this journey back to the 70s. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep imagining.